The door is closed, Curie unhelpfully informed their comrades while staring up at the absolutely massive gate, separating the airlock of the shuttle dock from the interior areas of the great community station. Shada smacked her lips, pressing herself as flat as she could against the wall of the building they used for cover, in order to remain close enough to the gate in case it opened. Curie had been by her side, less careful about not being seen, while briefly peeking around the corner to survey the current situation, before falling back towards their more massive company, who had to stay further back in cover as to not draw any attention to them. Of course, Shada and Curie stuck out from the crowd more than Moore or Conglosh did, however they were still hard to spot overall as long as they tried to conceal themselves. "We are too early," Shada agreed with Curie, staring at the sealed edges of the pretty much impenetrable safety door. "Looks like we're going to have to wait." "Let's just hope we're not too late," Conglosh commented in a low rumble, his eyes erratically scanning his barren surrounded, limited by the concealed space of their hiding place between the walls of two unevenly scaled buildings, one of which had clearly been only recently rebuilt, while the other one showed plenty of signs of aging and scratches and decoloration along its exterior. Under one of his huge arms, the giant was carrying two large suitcases of very different manufacturing. One was made of a sturdy, rough, grey cloth that was supported by metal and leather braces on its edges to give it structure. The other was looking more like a huge brown leather pouch with a sturdy metal clamp, keeping it shut. James's and Shada's belongings had been stashed exactly where she had arranged with the Rushgak. Luckily, they kept their word. "You know, saying that isn't very helpful," Shada annoyedly admonished the Tonashasite, managing to keep her voice to a low hissing instead of straight up yelling at him like she wanted to do. Of course, they could also be too late. Or that door could never open, since James was already dead on the curb on the other side of the station. All those were real possibilities. But they weren't possibilities that would be of any use acknowledging, since, should they become real, there really wasn't anything they could do about it. Sure, they could probably hide for a while. Sure, they might be able to try and gain some leverage with the weapons they had, but realistically, none of that mattered. They were up against an entire space station, one of the most important ones in existence. They didn't stand a chance. James knew that too. He had correctly picked out the one single possibility they had, using the fact that he wanted him alive. The one piece of leverage he could actually hold over them. If they couldn't capitalize on it, everything else would just be a fleeting delay of the inevitable. This whole situation was crazy. She'd have tried her best to keep herself busy in one way or the other, even if it was a literal busy work, just so her brain didn't have any time to catch up to just how unbelievably crazy all of this was. A shadow organization that spanned even across the council out for their heads? Her old colleagues sent out to arrest her? The combination of nearly her entire life, left behind to never return in the blink of an eye decision. An Uton, who had been there all those years, had to have been the one to give the order. It was sheer madness. She was ripped out of the drowning thoughts that she had slipped into for a moment by Conglosh, indignantly replying to her. "In that case, how about we talk about how we get rid of the roughneck should that door open for us?" he propounded, referring to the guards that were annoyingly within spitting distance of the airlock, his lips raising slightly as he spoke, exposing more of his teeth. It was quite strange, hearing somebody who seemed to be almost resigned to his fate speak in such a near placid tone about it, without a hint of appreciation swinging with his voice. Made her wonder more and more just who James had picked up there. At least he didn't make the situation much worse, since he was all doom, but no gloom. She'd pulled herself back, and now fully leaned against the wall, slightly sinking into herself as she let out a long sigh, her feet sliding across the floor a tiny bit. "If we shoot at them, they'll probably get out of the way," she replied, completely done with careful planning or passive maneuvers. This got her concerned and interesting looks from her companions, especially from Moore. The old lady's nostrils flared, and she turned her head sideways to directly look at Shada with one of her big, dark eyes. "And what if they do not?" she asked worriedly, her idle hand starting to become slightly twitchy. "Then we shoot them," Conglosh almost immediately replied in Shada's stead, making Moore look at him with an expression of horror, her eyes widening and her mouth standing slightly open. She didn't verbally respond, however. Her reaction was all one needed to be assured of her disapproval of even entertaining the idea. Shada shook her head. "Well, I don't like it either," she said, with a lot less horror and a lot more resignation in her voice. "So if you have a better idea, speak up. Otherwise we'll have to do it the hard way." Moore lifted her hands, slowly pulling her claws along her long face while tightly shutting her eyes, leaving even ridges through her fur. "I cannot think of anything," she said, softly, her eyes still closed. "But that does not mean we can just go that far." Shada smacked her lips. Well, if you don't like it, you can leave at any time, she said aloofly. But do keep in mind, they have a warrant out for you as well by now. Not that I'm trying to blackmail you here, but you basically gave up your possibility for a clean conscience when you stepped out of that embassy. Now you're in this with us. Moore seemed to slightly tremble as Shada's words washed over her. Apparently it had taken just as long for reality to sink in as it did for Shada. She probably thought it just as much, if not more, which was understandable, given that she had, in a way, much less time to prepare than Shada had. I think we should wait for James, Curie suddenly spoke up, causing the conversing parties to turn towards them surprisedly. The cyborg stood perfectly still, seemingly staring off into the distance and barely acknowledging their companions. What? Shada asked confusedly, while Conglorch replied brashly. And what do you think we are doing right now? Curie's body shifted slightly, just enough to hint at them changing their focus onto the people surrounding them, but not enough to indicate where exactly their focus lay now. I don't mean it like that, they stated calmly. What I am saying is that, once that door opens, we should still wait for James. If we have this much trouble crossing the small way between here and the dock, surely he will have many more problems crossing the station to meet up with us. It would be better for us to try and help him, so we can ensure he joins us before we leave the station. They explained their thinking very matter-of-factly, however. None of their comrades could do anything but stare at them. Curie, that will not work, Moore tried to softly explain to them. However, Shada was still taken very aback. Curie was many things, but dumb wasn't one of them. They may have been naive at times, but they could put two and two together. They knew that James needed to provide them a way off the station before he could leave the control room, just as much as anyone else did. Leaps of logic weren't exactly something Curie was usually guilty of. Shada wasn't even sure if they were capable of such a thing. First softly, then getting stronger and stronger, Curie started to sway in place, their forward hands fidgeting with each other, as their eyes once again seemed to look past instead of at everyone. Shada immediately recognized what was happening. Oh no, she thought frantically, already starting to hurry over towards Curie. Not now. James said he would open the shuttle bay for us, then open the airlock to let us fly to Conglorch's ship in one of the docks, let us board, and then open the dock so we could leave. After that, he said he will join up with us and we will leave together, they muttered as Shada approached. Their at first clear words became faster and more muddled the more they talked, as their swaying and fidgeting got more frantic as well. But as soon as James leaves the control, the doors will be closed again, and the shuttle would already have left, so he would have to find another. But as soon as the doors are closed, he'll be completely locked in on the station. And while it might be possible that he could secure another shuttle for himself, even if he did so, the door of the dock would either be closed again, locking us in and him out, or it would still be open, meaning the dock's atmosphere would be voided and there was no way for him to join us. He doesn't have an environmental suit, and not even Deathworlders can endure the void long enough to make it from a shuttle onto a ship. So no matter how we try to approach the problem, there will always be one or more factors preventing James from meeting back up with us. And that is not even taking the actions of our opposition into account, who have an unknown number of resources at their disposal, and clearly won't idly stand by while we act. So time will also be acting against us. Waiting will give them more time to carefully plan their approach. So how is James planning on circumventing all of these impediments and rejoin us before we leave the station, or are put into a situation we can't escape by our opposition? I can't figure it out. Shada had to bite her lip as she approached the cyborg. Moore was still trying to encouragingly speak to them, while Conglorch looked down at the cyborg with an almost morbid curiosity. The feline lifted one hand up to Moore, indicating to let her do the talking, as she slightly crouched down to Curie's level. Curie, she said carefully, trying to maneuver herself into the field of view of the cyborg slowly. If we can figure out what he is planning, we may be able to assist him, Curie rambled on, without acknowledging Shada's approach. If he has a way to get past the doors, the shuttles and the docks, we may not need to go on ahead, but can instead take the same path he is and support him. We only have to figure it out. Shada's mind flashed pictures of Curie's dark, destroyed lab in her mind. The cyborg excitedly prattling on about their findings while she desperately tried to silence them without success, with the cyborg having become unaware of the danger they were in. It was her duty to make sure Curie was alright, but when they were like this, she had never been able to do anything about it, not even in absolute emergencies. Curie, listen to me, she said, silently but firmly, while trying to get her face closer to that of the cyborg, as much as their swaying metal shell would allow it. Maybe he... No, that wouldn't work. Although we could try to... No, Curie mumbled to themselves, their focus unbroken. If only I knew more about things like this. This isn't a machine. There are too many factors, too many variables, too much left to chance, but I have to. Moore and Conglorch seemed to be growing more concerned as they looked down at the muttering cyborg, and Shada tried to calm them down. It got to the point that Conglorch slowly walked past them and slowly stuck his head out past the wall, to make extra sure they still had their full cover and nothing unexpected was happening around them. Sheeta's jaw clenched tighter, as she lost faith in the idea that she knew what to do. If only James was here. So far she had tried to avoid that very line of thinking. If James was here, the situation would be totally different. So wondering what he would do if he wasn't all too helpful. Besides, she really didn't want her thoughts to dwell on him of all people right now. However, right now, even though the thoughts still cut like a knife, it was also the necessary break from her previous thinking she needed. If James was here, he could get Curie back to reality, but how? A new scene flashed across her mind. The same room as before, but not dark and desolate. Instead, it was a burning inferno, her vision hazy from smoke and heat. James was in the corner, saying something about someone being trapped. She could barely hear him over the fire as he was yelling, so she couldn't understand at all what he was saying to whoever was with him. However, she could see what he was doing. Taking a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves, she unclenched her jaw and let herself sink down even further. She also slightly backed away from Curie, remaining about an arm's length from the cyborg and reaching out one open hand. However, that alone wasn't enough to make Curie react to her. She would have to say something. But what? Her outstretched arm started to tremble, and she quickly grabbed his wrist with her free hand to try and subdue it. "Curie, listen," she said, in the calmest tone she could muster. Between almost each word, she hesitated slightly, as she had to think of what to say as she was going along. She could only think of one good way to start. "We're going to figure this out, okay? Just not right now." She didn't know if she had found the right wording, if it had something to do with her posture or if Curie just had a moment of clearance on their own. However, her heart almost skipped a beat, as the cyborg's movement slowed and their head slightly raised. Their eyes didn't fixate, and she couldn't be sure if they were looking at her, but it was the most she had gotten out of them yet. "Everything you said is right. This situation seems pretty dire when looking at it logically, but James has a plan," she said, and she tried very hard to make her voice sound upbuilding, although her hand clenched around her wrist even tighter now. "I don't know what it is, and we probably won't figure out what he's planning right now, but he has a plan, and that plan involves for us to go through that door and take the shuttle. That is what he told us specifically, and since we don't know anything else, that is what we have to go with, and build from there, step by step. And if we wait too long to do it, we might not only never know what his plan is, but we might even interfere with it by accident. So we have to go now, alright? Just take my hand." Sheeta took heavy breaths while staring into Curie's red eyes, waiting for a reaction. For a few seemingly endless seconds, the fear of having immediately lost them again crept up on her. But then their gaze slightly shifted once more, and it seemed they were looking Sheeta up and down. "You are bleeding," they stated in a tone of suppressed surprise, and their hands stopped fidgeting, instead reaching out for Sheeta's hand. Instead of taking it, they grabbed its sides and turned it slightly, in order to better inspect it. A bit confused, Sheeta looked down at her wrist, and indeed her hand had closed around her wrist so tightly that the very tips of her claws had slightly dug into her own skin, causing 4 needle-thin trickles of blood to run down her arm. With a soft exhale from her nose, she reassured, "I'll be fine. Don't worry about it." A smile formed on her face for a brief moment. She had gotten Curie back. She would be able to look after them. Curie let go of the size of Sheeta's palm, and instead put one of their small hands in hers. They were still looking down, almost as if they tried to avoid looking at her face. Softly, they asked, "I can't figure it out. James didn't lie to us, did he?" Sheeta's once again free hands immediately closed into a tight fist again, and she almost bit her tongue as her teeth shut tight. She also noticed Moore's and Conglorch's glances at the two change for a moment, their faces showing a mixture of concern and a concealed warning. Sheeta's breast turned shaky as she spoke again. "No, he didn't. It wasn't. It's not. He," she stammered, and noticing that she couldn't quite order her thoughts on the fly, stopped for a second. Shaking her head, she lifted her free hand, unclenching it before heavily shoving an open palm in her own face, remaining with her hand hardly pressed against her cheek. For a moment she wondered if she should just reassure them and move on with it. However, she remembered how strongly Curie disliked dishonesty, and it also just wasn't fair towards them. Then, having collected her thoughts, she started again. "I don't think he lied," she said plainly, lowering her hand and looking directly into the cyborg's eyes. "I think he is really planning on meeting back up with us, as in that is what he really wants to do, but I will be honest with you. I have no idea how he wants to achieve that, or if he even has an exact plan for it at all." There. She had said it. She hoped the universe was happy. Apparently trying to optimism her way through this messed up situation was a crime so abhorrent that it needed to be snuffed out right now. But that would mean he... Curie started slowly, and Shada took it upon herself to finish the sentence for them. He's trying to make sure we are all right before worrying about himself. She had half expected herself to shut down after saying it out loud, to just kind of stop where she stood. At least she had expected a bigger feeling of dread to swing along with it. But in the end, it wasn't so bad. It was almost kind of freeing in a way. Apparently she had managed to lie to herself quite as well as she thought, and being aware of the fact at all times, just without acknowledging it, didn't make things all that much better. But we can't just leave him here alone, Curie immediately piped up again, their legs elevating them a bit higher as they pushed themselves closer to Shada, who didn't even flinch. Listen, I'll be right there with you, but the sad reality is, we don't really have a choice, she said, returning the cyborg's gaze with a calm energy. And if you're honest with yourself, you know as well as I do that James won't even think of saving his own skin, as long as he has the possibility to get us out. So if we try and stay, we're most likely going to make things worse for both ourselves and him. Curie remained silent for some time. Then they merely stated, I don't like this, while still holding on to Shada's hand. Shada closed her palm around theirs. You and me both, she agreed. James will be fine, right? More suddenly spoke up from behind Curie, her large face looking off into the distance worriedly. If any one of us will be, it's going to be him, Conglorch replied in dry humour, and he wasn't entirely wrong. The best chances for James to be alright was if they caught him without injury, in which case everyone currently present would have a much bigger problem on their plate. We're just going to have to trust him, Shada said, regaining a sense of confidence. It was our job to get this far without getting ourselves killed, and he will do his part as well. A general air of agreement surrounded the group. Afterwards they fell silent for a while. As much as this was the reality, they would have to work with it despite their apprehension. None of them felt elated to talk more about it than absolutely necessary. Without any environmental cues or devices to help with it, keeping track of time was difficult. This meant that none of them had a clear grasp of just how long they had already been waiting, remaining in cover and staring at the massive door, hoping for it to open at any moment. It could have only been minutes. It might already have been hours. All they knew was that the seconds were dragging on, and each one that passed quietly took some of their confidence with it, slowly eroding it over time. James had been quite sure he would get that door open, and he was certainly someone that couldn't be taken lightly, but he still was only one man, and he was up against a nation. And as their opposition didn't seem to be all too concerned about finding them, given the still comparatively lax security measures, that meant they were focusing on something, or someone else. It had been for a while now that they have had to accept that on their own. They stood no chance in their current situation. All they could do was flee and hope to find some support in time before they could get overwhelmed by an unconquerable enemy. But now, maybe the time was coming that they would have to admit to themselves that perhaps even the goal of fleeing was an expectation that they had set too high for themselves. The more time ticked by, the more it seemed to become a real possibility that they were completely stuck. That they had already lost a while ago and just weren't realizing it yet. The possibilities weighed heavily on everyone's minds. Shada hadn't been able to try and remain completely hidden anymore, and had instead taken to prancing up and down within their cover, just to give herself something to do, as she felt that her legs would probably refuse to start walking again should she stand still for too long. Curie was on the complete other side of the spectrum, and had frozen in place for a while, not showing a single bit of movement for what felt like minutes on end, before suddenly slightly adjusting their position, and then freezing again. At Moore's feet there was a small, thin pile of fur forming by now, since so much kept falling out of her coat as she kept raking through it with her claws. Only Conglorch managed to maintain his previous composure. He was still clearly tense, but not flat-out nervous about their situation. As soon as they were on that ship, he would have some serious questions to answer. If they ever made it on that ship. Shada knew she shouldn't doubt that fact if she wanted to keep her sanity, but once she had counted her 236th time of pacing up and down her little self-determined lane, it started to occur to her that maybe her sanity was already hanging on by a thread. By now she was itching to say something, just for the sake of saying something and not silently walking back and forth anymore. However, her lips and tongue kept uselessly quivering in place instead of her actually opening her mouth. She couldn't think of anything to say. She should just say anything. Maybe something about... something. She just didn't know. Come on. You're not usually sparse on words, she told herself. What's wrong with you? Just say anything. Something about the situation, or the past, or even the weather, even if it doesn't exist here. Yes, I'll just do that. Just say something about the weather. She stopped dead in her constant tracks and utterly cleared her throat, directing the eyes of her companions onto her by breaking the silence. So, she said, still trying to force her tongue to do her bidding. However, a much louder sound interrupted her, making her quickly shut her mouth again. It wasn't only the group. Quickly the heads of everyone around turned in the same direction, as they followed the loudly erupting sound coming directly from one of the station's walls. Well, I'll be, Conglorge commented loudly, his voice barely carrying over the sound of many, many tons of moving steel moving aside to grant passage behind his gateway. I take back everything I've said. He actually did it, Morse said, her hands sinking from her fur down to her sides, as she stared up at the colossal moving door in awe. He said he would, Curie replied, their synthetic voice carrying a tone akin to satisfaction. Different from her friends, she'd had nothing to say for some time. She just stared at the unbelievable mass of metal moving for their convenience. Then she smacked her lips and shut her mouth tightly, her teeth clacking against each other once, as she clenched her fists and her tail started swinging wildly. Up until that very moment, she hadn't quite realized just how close to the edge she had been. However, now that she had been violently yanked back onto solid ground with a single tug, she would use it before any doubt could creep up on her again. Well, we better get going, she loudly announced, drawing her weapon without hesitation, waving everyone to follow her. The spectacle of the enormous gate moving still had most people's attention drawn to it. If there was an ideal time to move out, it was now. We don't want to make James wait now, do we? The signal for a departing shuttle had popped up quite suddenly. However, the pilot wasn't too worried about it. It was a bit strange, sure, but nothing unheard of. So, as he already heard the airlock's door starting to move to let in whatever big shot needed to get off the station right then and right now, he casually meandered over towards his shuttle, opening it per remote control from a few steps away. As the large, polished door swung open, granting him entrance into his vehicle, he could hear some commotion behind him. Sounded quite wild, so he turned around for a second, looking if he could see just what was so exciting out there that people needed to loudly scramble around for. He saw nothing detailed, just that a lot of security was there, and people were going wild. Interesting. Would he be transporting some kind of celebrity? Had he missed somebody coming to the station? It wouldn't be his first time shipping important guests. However, usually they were some political bigwigs or business giants. Nothing people usually went wild for when they saw them on the streets. Maybe this time would be something more interesting. If it was someone he knew, maybe he could snag an autograph. Who knew? After all, they would be together in the cabin for a while. Either way, he would have to do his job first. So he casually let himself glide down into his pilot's seat and switched on the board systems. With a soft electrical humming, the screens, dials and devices all around him came to life. He took his typical brief moments to make sure everything was nice and in working order. Nothing seemed to be out of the ordinary. All values were correct and all systems were running correctly. Already his communication hub was insistently pinging at him, relating that the tower was already trying to build up communications with him. They were always so impatient. Feeling a misguided sense of satisfaction, he left them waiting on the line for just a moment longer while he stretched himself with relish, feeling his muscles loosening up almost immediately. Then he finally accepted the call with a wave of his hand. It was audio only today. Good chance whoever was manning the terminal today had been on shift for a while without a chance to freshen up, given all the chaos that had been going on in administrative. Hello Tower, this is Shuttle GCS-079, system checks are complete, and we are currently waiting for our passenger to arrive. Once they do, I'll be requesting takeoff, so it would be great if you could already have readback ready for me at that time. That alright? He relayed over the comms, ending the sentence with a casual implied nudge in his voice. I have you on my screen, 079. A strange-sounding voice came back to him. It didn't sound like any voice he had heard coming out of this radio before. And as weird as that was already, there was something even weirder. Namely, that message wasn't up to protocol at all. He looked at the audio-only symbol bemusedly. Maybe the day had been even longer than anticipated. Not in the mood to have somebody written up for being tired and possibly new at their job, he musically replied, Tower? You want to run that by me again? I have you on my screen, 079. The tower's operator immediately repeated, not correcting their mistake in the slightest. If I need any more out of you, I'll let you know. Now stay quiet. I have like 100 other docs I need to pay attention to as well, so only contact me if you have something important to say. Whoever that was sounded quite annoyed. And he also didn't sound like an operator at all, tired and overworked or not. Was he on the wrong frequency? Was somebody playing a prank on him? But what did they mean they had 100 more docks to pay attention to? He thought about contacting security for a moment. However, usually if shuttle pilots had to contact security while on their shift, they would do so over the tower since they knew the right protocols in a case like this. And if something was going down at the tower, surely security would already be aware. He didn't get the chance to contemplate on it much longer, though, because right after he had finished the thought, a loud sound rang out not too far from him. He could hear it very clearly since the shuttle's door was still open. He had never heard any before in person. However, he was still fairly sure. These were gunshots. By now he also realised that the commotion behind him wasn't caused by people being excited. He looked back and saw people scrambling to get away. And then he heard even more shots ring out. For a moment he just sat there, stunned by the situation. That wasn't here, was it? The incident hadn't been around here. It had been in administrative. Hadn't it? All things considered, it took him way too long to snap back to reality and do the only thing he could think of, which was to quickly close the shuttle door and melt into his seat, trying to pretend like he wasn't even there. Then he remembered his previous thought. Calling the security was most likely a very good idea now. And the rude operator did say he should make contact if something important happened. With a shaky hand, he opened the comm channel, and with a quiver in his voice he said, "Mayday, Mayday. Tower, this is Shuttle GCS-079. I need you to call security immediately. There are shots being fired outside the dock. I repeat, Mayday, Mayday." "I heard you the first time," the voice replied, annoyed and not sounding the least bit compassionate about the pilot's dire situation. A moment went by, during which he could do nothing more but stare at the display in utter disbelief. Had they just dismissed him? As there was presumably an attack happening? What was going on? He was just about to speak back up and give the operator a serious piece of his mind, when suddenly the comm line came back to life, as the operator perked back up, sounding excited this time. "Wait, did you say shots were being fired at your location?" he asked, making that sound like he had just met a celebrity or something. "Yes!" the pilot aggressively answered, feeling like one of the conversing parties had to be insane at this point. He just wasn't quite sure if it was him or the operator. "Perfect!" the operator happily replied, completely ignoring the pilot's tone. "Stay on the line, one moment." Some muttering and shifting could be heard through the speakers. "Alright," the operator's voice then came through again. "You're at gate 7, then. Perfect. Alright, I have you on the screen and ho-ho, things are going well it seems." The pilot didn't even manage to be angry this time. He could only be aghast as he responded, "What are you talking about?" The operator was silent for a moment. Then he could be heard chuckling in an almost relieved tone. "Don't worry about it, the situation has already been handled. All you have to do is open the door for them in a moment," he said calmly, sounding very confident in his assessment. So, he probably had already been in contact with security. That at least explained why it seemed so busy. But what did he mean, open the doors for them? The question was immediately answered when someone heavily banged against the shuttle's door. "Open up!" a voice demanded loudly. "I won't ask nasty again." The pilot shook his head. He got that whoever it was probably under a lot of stress, but still, no need to be so abrasive about it. Yeah, I'm on it already," he said, while reaching over to open the shuttle door again. Trying to appear nonchalant and like he had not just undergone the stages of grief in the span of a minute, he casually leaned over and wanted to greet his new passengers with a cool, "Hey." However, his voice got stuck in his throat as he turned his head just to look straight into the dark opening of a gun's barrel. "Nice shuttle," a huge Shadaeprajschet said, his fiery eyes staring down at the pilot with an intense gaze while he pointed his huge gun right at his forehead. "I think we'll take it." The pilot couldn't think of anything to say. He just sat there, staring at the large predator. However, someone else thought of a reply for him. "It's all yours," the voice out of the speakers said happily. "Sorry for the wait." "You better be sorry," Shada replied, not quite able to contain the sheer relief in her voice to hear James's voice again. "We've been waiting forever." Elegantly, she slipped past Conglorsh and into the shuttle, climbing across the seemingly petrified pilot. All the while she could hear the dock's massive gates, that they had waited for so long to open, already close again, sending them away from the station, and hopefully, from everyone trying to stop them. "Get out of here already," Shada loudly ordered the pilot, snapping her fingers right in front of his face to snap him out of his stupor. "You probably want to be in that safe room of yours once the airlock opens, unless you want a free ticket to the void." The man looked back at her, expressionless. I can't just," he stammered. "Oh, don't be a hero," James's voice said out of the speakers. "I give you express bloody orders to get out of there. Save your skin while you still can." That at least seemed to do it. Quickly and without any fanfare or even an attempt at keeping his dignity, the man scrambled out of his seat and past the group, quickly running away and abandoning the shuttle. She immediately took the vacant seat, hopping into the pilot's chair and bouncing for a second as she checked over the different dials and displays. "Alright everybody, take your seats. We're taking off shortly, so please keep your seats in an upright position and your trays collapsed," she gently announced as Conglorch, Moore and Curie all climbed into the shuttle seats and buckled themselves up. "We are expecting a smooth takeoff, runway is free, wind is mild," James said, getting in on the joke as the shuttle door closed behind them. "Your frequency is the one we are currently using, and your squawk is whatever you want it to be. All other shuttle operations are currently suspended, so you should have free flight. What dock will you be heading for today?" Shada was in the process of currently adapting all of the Bohr systems to her own size, which was much smaller than the previous pilots. However, she took a moment to look over towards Conglorch to see if he would answer the question. "Dock 194, if you please," the giant indeed gave back, while settling into his place right behind Shada. "Dock 194 it is. I'll go ahead and arrange that for you," James replied happily in his best customer service voice. "Shuttle DCS 079, you have permission for takeoff." As he said that, the entire shuttle started to shake, as the room around it was moved by the force of the enormous engines, starting to open the second door of the massive airlock. James had not bothered voiding the room's atmosphere before opening the door. The hiss of all the air being sucked out of the room in a single fraction of a second loudly penetrated the shuttle's walls. Moore leaned forward, her head appearing as she sighed. "You do know how to fly something like this, right?" she asked, with a barely suppressed sense of worry in her voice. Shada smirked. "Come on. I've flown ships more than 100 times the size of this measly shuttle," she said, stretching her arms and turning towards her controls. "Now, let's see. Where's the acceleration?" She was just messing with Moore, of course. Learning to fly a short-range shuttle like this was one of the first things you got to do when training to become a pilot. Quickly, she reached out and took over the controls. By now, a noticeable lack of shaking indicated that the door had been fully opened for them, and the display confirmed as much. With both hands up, she started the takeoff, and quickly, the shuttle started to move. With a jolt, they started gliding across the floor, steadily accelerating. Within the blink of an eye, they were free of the station, pushing forward into the void outside of its hulls, James cheering them on over the communication line.